All right. For those of you who may not know, my name is Christy Beaver, and I'm the Director of Professional Development at CABR. So glad you guys are here to join us today. I want to make a quick introduction here. Rebecca Simpson Heimlich is a small business attorney with Finney Law Firm and has over 25 years of experience in litigation and advocacy. Rebecca has devoted her practice during this challenging time to assist small businesses to navigate the relief available to them under the CARES Act. And she has a quick presentation for you, and then we will get to the question and answer. So if you guys have any questions, make sure you use the chat function, and then we'll make sure we get as many questions as we can answered. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Christy, and thanks everybody for joining. We appreciate having this opportunity to talk with you guys. I am going to try to get through my presentation in about 20 minutes, so that leaves plenty of time for all of your questions. So before I get going, and for some reason my PowerPoint is not advancing. That's not good. There we go. Before we get going, just a quick disclaimer, and I'm sure you guys all know that this webinar is not legal advice. If you would like legal advice, please give us a call. My email will be at the end, and my cell phone is 513-703-6227. Email is rebecca@finneylawfirm.com, and we're certainly helping a lot of small businesses and self-employed and those who get 1099s, independent contractors through this process. The first thing that I want to talk about today, though, is, and you guys may have heard, that the loan programs have exhausted their funding already. So the CARES Act was passed just a couple weeks ago, and banks started taking applications for the Paycheck Protection Program just 2 weeks ago, and the funding is already depleted. So you'll see here on the screen that the SBA notice is posted on their website right now that they're unable to accept applications at this time for either the Paycheck Protection Program, which I'm going to tell you about, as well as the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And so you're probably asking, well, then why are we having this webinar if we can't apply? Well, it's because Congress is trying to allocate more funds. The Republicans have asked for $250 billion more dollars. Democrats think it's important, but they also want some additional funding for hospitals and local governments, and so they haven't agreed to a standalone bill. The Senate has actually gone home until Monday, so nothing is going to happen until next week, but everybody is hopeful that Congress will allocate more funds. And so it's still important, and we'll talk about this a little more, to go ahead and apply now with your bank if your bank is still taking applications, because you want to get in line. There are still a lot of applications that banks have that haven't been sent to the SBA yet, so you want to make sure that you get in line quickly so that if it does open back up, and we all hope it does, that you'll be further in front in the line. So the Paycheck Protection Program, it was funded with $349 billion, and you can see here on this map where the funding has gone to small businesses. So looks like the highest level is $6.6 billion or more, and Ohio is showing at that level, along with California and Texas and New York and some other states. So what we're going to cover today is we will cover both the Paycheck Protection Program and then Economic Injury Disaster Loan, so that you have an overview of it and can answer some questions. So when it hopefully opens back up and the process starts with your bank, because sometimes it's a long process and there's a lot of questions about it, you'll be in a good position to get going on that. We'll also talk about expanded unemployment benefits, some tax relief. We'll briefly touch on some of the benefits to individuals. And then depending upon where Christy thinks we should go, we may go through some frequently asked questions, or we may just go straight to your questions. So in general, there are two loan programs that you've heard me mention. I'll call the Paycheck Protection Program the PPP, and the Emergency Economic Disaster Loan the EIDL. And these were already, the EIDL in particular was already an existing program with the Small Business Administration, and it has just been expanded so that more people can apply, so that eligibility was expanded, as well as they loosened up some of the qualifications. The PPP, even though it is under the SBA 7A loan program, which was pre-existing, it really is a new program. So That's where we're going to start, because that is the forgivable loan program and the one that most people have been interested in. The goal of the PPP is to keep people working, and even if they're not working, to keep payroll going and to keep people paid and to offer some relief to small businesses. And it is and can be, when it's up and running, relatively quick and easy, and that has a lot to do with your bank. Some of the banks have gotten them processed pretty quickly. Some banks have been slow, but just some of the elements: no personal guarantees required. You don't have to, generally with an SBA loan, you would have to show that you can't get a loan elsewhere. But with the PPP, you don't have to do that. With this program, as we talked about, you apply directly through your bank. There have been some hiccups with the program. I mean, it's something that, they rolled out very quickly. And the amount of loans that the SBA has processed over the last 2 weeks has essentially been about 14 times what they normally process in a year. So there have been hiccups, but everybody's working hard to get the money out to small businesses. So who is eligible? In general, small businesses who have 500 employees or less, who were in operation on or before February 15, 2020. Sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed are also eligible, as well as some nonprofits. And we will talk about, there are different ways of calculating your loan depending upon what type of business you are. I just want to note there's a special rule for partnerships and LLCs that file as partnerships. Generally, if you're a self-employed individual, you will apply yourself, or an independent contractor, you will apply yourself. But if you're a partnership, if you're a partner in a partnership or in an LLC that files as a partnership, you will need to file at the partnership level rather than at the partner level. So who is not eligible? And you can read this, and I'm hoping that Christy will have the PowerPoint available for you afterwards. And if not, we can make sure maybe we post it on our website. But so just in general, those who are not eligible are those whose business is an illegal activity. Household employers, for some reason, the SBA and Treasury have determined that they are not eligible. Certain people who are involved in the criminal justice system. And then if you've ever defaulted on an SBA loan and over the last 7 years and you've caused the government to lose money, then you're not eligible. So in general, how much can you get? It is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. And I say payroll with air quotes because it's a defined term. It's not necessarily what you would necessarily expect. I mean, if you have W-2 employees, it is very similar to your payroll. And generally your payroll company can help you determine what your average monthly payroll over the last year is. Because as you can see on the slide, certain things are included in that. And it generally is most of what you give to W-2 employees. And there are a few things that are excluded. For example, compensation to individual employees is capped at an annual salary of $100,000. The employer's portion of FICA is not included. Compensation to people who live, employees whose principal place of business is outside of the U.S. is not included. And then with respect to some tax credits that were given in the Families First Corona Response Act, if a business takes advantage of that, then to that extent, that's not included. Now, I want to talk a little bit about independent contractors and self-employed, because that is different. And even though banks were supposed to start taking applications for those on the 10th of this month, the guidance actually on how you calculate payroll for them was not put out until the 14th of April. So it was helpful because it's cleared up a lot of questions with respect to how you calculate the maximum loan, but it was only 2 days before they ran out of money. So in general, if you are self-employed or you're an independent contractor yourself who gets a 1099, what you're going to need to do is either take your 2019 IRS Form 1040 Schedule C, line 31, and you average that, you divide it by 12, so you get an average monthly net profit, and then you're going to multiply that by 2.5. Now, if you haven't done your 2019 tax form yet, what the regulations are saying is that you actually have to fill it out, because you're going to need to give that to your bank. So the big question is what to do for my loan to be forgiven. And so what's going to happen is once you get your first distribution of your loan, they're going to look at the next 8 weeks of how you spent that money. And 75% of what you spend is going to need to be spent on payroll. Now, the extra 25% can be spent on 3 things: mortgage interest, rent, or utilities. And so those are the forgivable items that you can spend the money on. You also have to maintain your employee and compensation levels, or they will reduce the amount of forgiveness. Now, with respect to independent contractors and self-employed, there is a special rule, which is the amount that you can give yourself of your net income is capped at 8 weeks. So essentially, it's you take your line 31 net profit. It's 850 seconds of that. So you can only get 8 weeks of that, and it's capped at that. So penalties for misuse of funds, and this has been explained clearly in the regulations. There are, if you misuse the funds, and if you do it intentionally, there are additional penalties, including potentially charges of fraud. So they're serious about folks using the money the way it's intended. So the question is, how do you apply? And as I said, I would still call your bank and get in line. And they may be taking the application at this point. They won't be able to send it into the SBA, but you need to contact your individual bank. And one of the reasons I say your individual bank is because what we're finding is most banks will not take applications from people who are not already customers, because they have been overwhelmed with applications. So they're trying to help their customers first. That we have found a bank that, if you'll switch your money over, they may help you, but they may be overwhelmed now as well. So there may be some smaller banks out there who, if you call around, might take your application. But I recommend that you start with your bank and you start immediately. So the deadline to apply is June 30th, 2020. But everyone anticipated that they would run out of funds before then, but hopefully there'll be more. All right, so we're going to move on now to the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, and people are calling that the EIDL. So one of the main differences between the PPP and the EIDL is if you get a loan through the EIDL, it is not forgivable. You will, the term is up to 30 months. For small businesses, the interest rate is 3.75%. You do not have to give a personal guarantee up to $200,000, but it will have to be paid back. There's one exception to that. When this first started, they were saying if you apply upon successful application within 3 days, they will send you a $10,000, they called it a loan advance, but made it clear that it would not have to be repaid. So it was essentially a grant. Well, because there's so many people applied and because they were running out of funding, they changed 2 things about that. First, they changed the timeline. I've talked with a lot of people who have applied and they still haven't heard. It's been days. And so the 3 days isn't really happening. And then the other thing is they have capped it at, I think it's $1,000 times the number of employees. But, and depending upon the number of employees, it could be less than that. But the point being, they are trying to come up with a way to reduce that $10,000 and do it in a way that's fair to people. So who is eligible? It's similar to who is eligible for the PPP. You have to have been in business January 31, 2020. There's a difference with respect to nonprofits. If you're a nonprofit, for the PPP, only C3s and C19s are eligible, but for the EIDL, any private nonprofit is eligible. Now, the purpose of the EIDL is to help out companies with debts and bills, liabilities, accounts payable, during the economic crisis, because they aren't getting as much income. That's the purpose of it. So the EIDL, as I said, has been around for a while. So for example, when there was the tornadoes in Nashville not too long ago, the governor declared that a state of emergency in that area. Now the president's declared, all of the US a state of emergency with respect to the coronavirus. So small businesses are able to apply. It's a $2 million maximum, whereas the Paycheck Protection Program is a $10 million maximum. And they do, another major difference is with respect to the PPP, your credit worthiness is not taken into account, but with respect to the EIDL, it is. And then one of the big questions is, can I apply for both? And the answer is yes, in certain circumstances. You can't apply for both for the same reason. So you wouldn't apply for the EIDL for payroll or mortgage interest or rent or utilities. But for example, if you are a real estate investor and you have people who are paying you rent and you're not getting the rent right now, apply for the EIDL to help you out with your mortgage principal, because principal is not included in the PPP. I think we've already gone over these examples, real estate investors and nonprofits. So another big difference with the EIDL, if it opens back up, is instead of applying with your bank, you go straight to the SBA website and apply there. And the first form that you're going to fill out is a fairly simple form. It's just a couple of pages. It doesn't ask for a ton of it. So clearly, as you go through the process, there's going to be more information requested that you're going to need to provide. So I'm going to talk just quickly about the CARES Act also gave some tax relief to businesses. And some of it you can use if you get the PPP, and some of it you can't. So there's a payroll tax deferral that allows either small businesses or those who are self-employed to defer payment of certain self-employment taxes. And you can do that until your PPP is forgiven. Once your PPP is forgiven, you can't defer anymore. Then there's an employee retention credit that's up to 50% of qualified wages, which sounds terrific, though the maximum credit is capped at $5,000. And with respect to the employee retention credit, you can't apply for both. You can't take advantage of both that and the PPP loan. You would have to choose. And so I would say, because the employee retention credit is capped at $5,000, obviously you would need to look at what your maximum PPP loan would be, but in general, it's probably going to be higher than that. There's good information on all the tax deferral programs on the IRS's website. All right, the expansion of unemployment insurance. So generally, I'm sure as most of you know, the unemployment benefits are not available to self-employed individuals or independent contractors. But the CARES Act has expanded that so that during this period of time, the independent contractors and self-employed will be eligible to receive those benefits. In addition to that, the CARES Act expanded the amount of funding. So in addition to whatever your state pays, you will get an extra $600 per week. And in Ohio, for those who are already on unemployment, they anticipated that that extra $600 would start going out about now, by the end of this week. With respect to independent contractors and the self-employed, there's been some information that's posted. So you'll see a website right here that I have, and that's where you go. Unfortunately, at this point for self-employed and independent contractors, there's not a portal where you can apply yet. They say that they're waiting for additional direction in order to be able to do that. They have just recently announced, though, that we're going to start taking people's information so that once we have the guidance and once we can open the portal, people will already be in line and we can start processing it. And they hope to be able to start processing unemployment by May 15th. I read this morning that just across the country that the unemployment systems have just been overwhelmed. So one of the points of the PPP really was to help with that and to have employers paying their employees on payroll so they didn't have to go on unemployment. So again, hopefully there'll be more funding for the PPP. And then just quickly, benefits to individuals. This is the part of the CARES Act that probably most people have heard about. Direct payments, $1,200 to those who have individuals who have an adjusted gross income of $75,000 or less. And then as your income gets higher, it gets phased out. If you file jointly, $2,400 if you make less than $150,000. Those checks have already started going out. I will say that in Ohio, those checks and also PPP checks that go to individuals are protected by a law under Ohio from garnishments and from creditors. Our Attorney General Yost sent out a press release as well as posted a notice on his website just a few days ago, explaining that and essentially warning creditors to stay away from this money that's supposed to be helping people through the difficult time. Other benefits to individuals, we already talked about the expanded unemployment benefits. There has also been a loosening of penalties for use of retirement funds, and there's been an expansion of tax benefits for charitable contributions both to individuals and to businesses. Now, I've reached the frequently asked questions slide, and so I guess my question to you, Christy, is do you want me to go through these questions, or do you want to go right to the questions from those on the call now?
Let's cover what questions have been asked on the call, and then whatever you feel like maybe doesn't get answered, if there's others here you want to go over.
Okay, sounds good.
So let's see what we got here. Okay. So Cinder would like to know, would it be better to wait for Ohio's self-employed subcontractor unemployment, or can you apply for both?
You're not going to be able to apply for both the unemployment and the PPP. If I were deciding this, I would wait a bit. I mean, since independent contractors and self-employed there's not even a way to apply yet in Ohio, I would wait and see if more funding comes for the PPP, because the PPP funding is going to be 2.5 times your average monthly payroll. And then after you get that and you've gone through the forgiveness process and your loan has been forgiven, if at that point you still need assistance, then unemployment may be something that you want to consider. But I personally would wait at least until the state is starting applications for unemployment, because the PPP amount, for at least for those 8 weeks, is probably going to be larger.
All right. Patrick says he's 1099 and his checks are direct deposited into his personal account and not a business account. Does he still qualify to get PPP?
If he files the 1040 Schedule C, he will qualify. I will tell him that if he will be eligible. If he gets the funding, I would recommend to him that he open up a separate bank account so that it will be clear where the money goes to, because he will only be allowed to take 8 weeks of that for himself.
All right. And then Susan wants to know, how is loan funds usage being tracked? How do we show how the money is spent in order for it to be forgiven?
That's a good question. So what's going to happen is at the end, once you receive your first allocation, at the end of 8 weeks after that, you're going to apply back to your bank or to the person who's holding your loan. Generally, I assume that will probably be your bank, but these can be sold on the secondary market. So you'll apply to whoever's holding your loan, and you'll have to show how that money has been spent over those 8 weeks. I will tell you that the guidance that has been coming out from the Treasury, and they're doing this quickly, so I'm not trying to criticize, but it has been a little slow. So when the banks are supposed to start taking applications for small businesses and sole proprietors on midnight or 12:01 a.m. on April 3rd, and the guidance for how to do that came out about 5 hours before. And as I said, with respect to independent contractors, the guidance for how their payroll is calculated came out 4 days after banks were supposed to start taking applications. So there has not been a ton of guidance on what is going to be required to show for forgiveness, other than saying that these are the items that you can spend the money on, and 75% has to be payroll, and independent contractors and self-employed can't go over 8 weeks for paying themselves. That's pretty much been the extent. So I am hoping and anticipating that they're going to give additional guidance, but at this point, I would say that it's going to be significantly dependent upon your bank, which has been true with respect to the application process. Some banks are asking for things that other banks are not asking for in the application process. So I would just recommend to people that you put it in a separate account, that you keep very good records of the money that you spend. And one other thing that I want to mention with respect to independent contractors and self-employed, something that's different with respect to them too, they are not able to use the money for utilities, rent, and mortgage interest unless they used it that way in 2019. They're going to have to show that in 2019 they had those expenses in order to be able to use the funding for that. That is not true with respect to employers with the W-2 employees.
All right. Chris wants to know, does PPP apply for S-Corps without a payroll?
So an S corp without a payroll, I believe, would still be a small business. And my guess is, because you don't have a payroll, that what you're going to be doing is the line 31 amount on your 1040. There has been, and so I was reading this morning that, for example, for farmers, they don't file a Schedule C. They file a different tax form, which has confused banks and farm credit unions who are trying to process the PPP for farmers, because the tax form they filed doesn't fit. So there may be other businesses in that situation, but yes, S corps absolutely should be eligible.
All right, this one goes back to your slide that had the banks on it. They ask if Chase is not included as an approved SBA lender.
That is even though those were the lenders that were approved prior to when the PPP started, they're generally SBA approved lenders, the ones that were on that slide. The SBA made the process for additional lenders to become qualified very easy for purposes of the PPP. They essentially just had to file a form, and if they were in good standing bank or credit union, and they were federally insured, then they could be. So that list has expanded greatly, and for purposes of the PPP, there are a lot more banks that are able to give out the loans. So I would, again, contact your bank first.
Okay. And Todd asked, what about landlords who have lost rent from non-payment from tenants?
So that was the EIDL that we talked about. The recommendation there is, I mean, obviously, if you have employees, you can apply for the PPP for purposes of the payroll. With respect to the loss of rents, what the EIDL is intended to cover is your debts and accounts payable and bills that you need to pay during the time of economic injury, because you're not receiving the revenues that you generally would receive. So I would recommend the EIDL for purposes of continuing to pay your bills while you're not getting the rent.
All right. DJ said, I applied last Friday. How long has it been taking for approval?
And that is very bank dependent. I have talked with people whose bank got them approved within 3 or 4 days. We've heard from people who received their funds within 4 or 5 days. I've talked to people who applied with their bank a week and a half ago, and it still hasn't gone to the SBA. So it's very dependent upon your bank.
Todd would like to know, what is your fee for assisting an independent contractor who wants to apply for PPP?
That's a Chris question. If anyone is interested, why don't you give me a call at 513-703-6227. Generally, what we've been doing is if small businesses wanted to engage us, and normally we're engaged on an hourly basis, but we were offering just a flat fee for small businesses. That fee will be smaller for just an independent contractor, I'm sure.
Okay. In the 2019 Schedule C, normally all this is required to apply. Is the question.
Was the question, is that all that's required to apply?
Yes.
No, there's going to be a lot of information asked about you and about your business, and showing that your business is in good standing and when it went into business, as well as if you want to claim rent and utilities, there's going to be information about that, and mortgage interest. Also, a lot of banks have been requiring additional documents just depending upon the bank. So yeah, there's going to be the general form asks you to give your payroll, and then you multiply it times 2.5. There are a lot of certifications you have to make about when you went into business and what kind of expenses you have, and that you don't have legal problems and things like that. But in addition, once that application goes in, the bank then is required to check that information and make sure that it looks right before they send it to the SBA. So the banks are asking for lots of different documents, and it's been a little different based on the bank.
Okay. How do you define the requirement that you have to need the funds in order to maintain payroll as a requirement for PPP?
Just the certification on the application. You check a box saying that you need it.
Can you explain the 8 weeks only for self?
Sure. So if you are one of the individuals who's self-employed or an independent contractor, and the way you calculate your payroll is by looking at line 31, dividing it by 12, and multiplying it by 2.5. So it's essentially 2.5 times your average monthly net profit from line 31. What you're going to do is you can only have 8 weeks of that average net profit. So what you would do is you would take your line 31, you would divide it by 52, and you multiply it by 8. And what you can give yourself is capped at that.
Okay. Sheila says, I work a W-2 job and I'm a realtor. Can I get unemployment as an agent and investor?
I believe you can, because your employer is going to apply for you. I mean, as a W-2 employee, you're not going to get the PPP. Your employer is going to apply on your behalf, and your employer will get the PPP for you to continue paying you the W-2 income. And then if you are as well an independent contractor, gets a 1099 and files a Schedule C, then you should be able to apply as well for it as an independent contractor.
Linda wants to know, what should a realtor apply for, and can you put up the website again?
Sure. When they say what should a realtor apply for, do they mean, I guess I don't know what they mean, but I will say that the website for the EIDL is right here. And when you say what should a realtor apply for, it really depends on the situation that you're in. If you're a realtor who has W-2 employees, you're going to want to apply on behalf of your W-2 employees. If you're a realtor for the PPP, if you're a realtor who gets 1099, you're going to want to apply for the PPP for yourself with your Schedule C. If you're someone who has both W-2 employees and you get a 1099 for yourself, or you have self-employment income for yourself, you can do that as well. You can apply on behalf of your W-2 employees, and you can apply for your self-employment income. Now, keep in mind that payroll or annual compensation is capped at $100,000. So, and then with respect to the EIDL, if you have debts or bills that you need to pay, in addition to payroll, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities, such as, for example, mortgage principal, which is not covered under the PPP, you can't use it for that, then you may want to also apply for the EIDL. You just can't apply for the EIDL for the same thing that you applied for the PPP for. So there are situations where you may want to apply for both. And for those who are real estate investors, I also wanted to mention, I know this is, I mean, it's a difficult time because you're not getting rent, and it may be a difficult time because you can't see houses, but maybe you were stuck and you saw a house and you wanted to be able to close on that, but you're having difficulty doing so. I think we are one of the only firms in the state who has started to be able to do a closing. We can do a closing virtually at this point. So I just wanted to let you know that Ivy Point Title can do that if anybody's interested.
All right. How does partnership LLCs work with these programs?
Partnerships and LLCs. So if you partnerships, even if the partners are getting self-employment or income, partnerships need to apply on behalf of the partnership instead of the partners applying individually for the PPP. If you are an LLC that files your taxes as a partnership, that applies to you as well. If you're an LLC that doesn't, then you will be, I mean, depending upon whether you're a sole proprietor or how whether you have a W-2 employees, that will determine it. But if you're either a partner or partnership or an LLC that files taxes as a partnership, it is the entity itself that needs to apply for the PPP.
Did you say that 2019 return has to be completed before one can apply?
Yes. So they say if you've already filed it, great, just look at your line 31. But if you haven't already filed it, you're going to need to complete it. It's what the regulations say.
Is a hardship requirement, is hardship a requirement to apply? One of the application certs alluded to that.
Yes. So there is a certification that says you essentially need the money to get through these difficult economic times, and you just check a box that you do.
Jeff said, if I apply for 2.5 times my Schedule C and pay myself 8-52 plus utilities and interest, but those expenses are less than my 2.5, will my loan still be forgiven?
It's an excellent question, and it's a question we've been getting a lot. And I had a long discussion yesterday about that. And the answer is there has been no direction on that whatsoever. So my advice at this point, based on the direction that has been given, is for payroll, it has to be at least 75%, but you can only pay yourself for 8 weeks. I would keep the proceeds of the loan in a separate account, and the amount of money that you don't use, you can just pay it back immediately.
Todd
Hopefully,
asked,
there'll be additional direction that comes out on that.
Todd asked, did I understand correctly that an independent contractor, meaning hairstylist who does booth rental, should apply for PPP and then unemployment once the state has opened it up?
No, I'm not necessarily saying that, because once you get the PPP, there may be a period of time where you're not allowed to apply for unemployment. If I had to guess when that period of time would be, it may be after June 30th of this year. And the reason I say that is because they're definitely trying to make sure that this money goes to payroll. And again, I say that with air quotes, because if you are an employer, you are required to maintain the same level of employees and compensation. And if you've had to lay someone off, or if people have quit, then you have until June 30th to return to the level of employees in order to get your full forgiveness. I would say that I wouldn't make it a plan to do the PPP and then as soon as unemployment opens up, do that. What I was saying is, if you get the PPP, you have that for 8 weeks, you get through the period, you get your forgiveness, it's forgiven, everything is done, but you still aren't working and you can't get any work. At some point, sure, go ahead and apply for unemployment. But I wouldn't want to do it while you're going through the process with the PPP or before you've gotten your PPP forgiveness.
So self-employed 1099s can use the PPP for mortgage and utilities, correct?
You can use it for mortgage interest, utilities, and rent. You cannot use it for mortgage principal.
If you're an S Corp that receives payroll for only a small amount of your total income, can you use the total income for PPP or only the amount that you use to run payroll?
If you have self-employment income on your Schedule C, line 31, and that's all that's been allowed so far. If you have W-2 employees as well as self-employment income on line 31, you can apply for both the W-2 employees and your line 31 net profit, average monthly.
All right, Delta says, I have an LLC for my business as a realtor, but I do not have a payroll. I have a business bank account and pay myself based on my income. How would I fulfill the requirement of how I use the funds if I don't have payroll? Just by writing myself checks that say payroll?
Payroll is a defined term, and they understand that it is just self-employment compensation to people. You essentially just document that you've paid yourself 8 weeks of that net profit, average net profit.
Gary and Jennifer Black want to know, if you pay monthly fees to your broker for desk space and office charges, does this qualify as rent?
You cut out. Are you asking if that qualifies as rent?
Yes, that's their question.
And I haven't seen an answer to that question. The only guidance they have given, they haven't defined what rent exactly is. They have said that, and I'll look up the date. Let's see, I don't have it at the top of my head. There's a limitation on, I think if essentially the lease was in place by February 15th, then you can use that rent for the PPP and claim that. And if you give me just a second, I will give you the exact date on that. If you want to start asking the next question, I can look it up while you're doing that.
Sure. Julie wants to know, she said, I was told that if you do not have an actual business bank account, you cannot apply. Is it really the Schedule C that determines qualification?
It's really the Schedule C. Yeah, there's no, in the regulations, there is nothing that has to do with a business bank account. Well, the reason though that they may be saying that is because some of the banks require you to use your login for your business bank account in order to apply for the PPP. But banks at this point, now that the information came out on the 14th, they definitely should now understand that the Schedule C is what's required. So if you have a personal account with them, maybe you can use your login. And not all banks are doing it that way. So it will just depend upon your bank.
Colleen wants to know, has anyone got any money for independent contractors yet? Or was the intake, has the intake stopped before it started?
That's an excellent question. Banks were supposed to be starting to take applications on the 10th, but banks didn't get the guidance till the 14th. So it's probably up to individual banks whether they actually started taking applications on the 14th or not. And I have not heard from anybody who tried and either was successful or not successful. So yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that a day and a half after the guidance was put out for independent contractors, the money was exhausted, but hopefully there'll be more. I wanted to get back with you on the rent question on the date, and that was true. Rent under lease agreements enforced before February 15th, 2020 counts for people who have the W-2 employees. If you're an independent contractor, you have to have showed rent as an expense for 2019. One of the things that's not clear, and the Treasury and SBA have said they're going to give additional guidance, is if you're an independent contractor or self-employed and you were in business as of February 1, 2020, but you were not in business in 2019, obviously you can't have a 2019 tax return. So they say there's going to be, you are eligible, but we don't know how we're going to figure it, essentially. So they say there'll be additional guidance on that.
What are the closing costs for the EIDL and PPP loans?
The PPP loans, the banks are not allowed to charge you anything. The EIDL loans, honestly, I have not seen anywhere where they talk about the cost, the closing cost on that. So I apologize, but I just don't know the answer to the EIDL. I've heard from folks who got the grant, but no one who's gotten the loan yet. I think the loan process on that is longer.
Okay, it says, even though the program is out of money now, if the application was submitted last week and a loan number was provided, does that mean those funds were allocated, or is the program out of money without regard to when the application was submitted?
It's definitely out of money with respect to when the application was submitted, because I know people who submitted applications on the first day it opened and their bank just hadn't gotten the information together and sent it to the SBA yet. So if the bank got the money together, here's the thing, I am guessing on all of this. If the bank has not sent it to the SBA yet, then there's no way your loan could have been approved yet, because it didn't go to the SBA, because that's part of the process. Once your bank takes your information and your documents and they check it over and you sign that everything is correct and you sign the certifications, then the bank has to send it to the SBA and then the SBA approves it. So if it hasn't even gone to the SBA, there's no way you're approved and will get funding in this round unless there's additional funding. But if they had already sent it to the SBA and you have a number from the SBA, then I don't know the answer to that question. You would assume if it's approved that you would be getting the funding, but I can't guarantee that. It just depends on, you know, did the SBA time it exactly appropriately where they shut off the program as soon as they approved it enough up to 349 million? I hope so. Billion, sorry, 349 billion.
All right, Larry says, please explain again how you must spend the PPP loan for total forgiveness. If
Sure.
the 25% is not used correctly, is only a portion of the forgiveness lost? How do you prove the 25% is correct expense?
Again, there hasn't been direction on that yet. The only direction is at least 75% has to be spent on payroll. The additional 25% can be spent on mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. If you're a Schedule C filer and you're asking for a PPP, you're gonna have to show that you paid those expenses in 2019. If you are someone who has W-2 employees, you don't have to show that to be able for those expenses to be eligible. But in general, yes, 75% payroll, the rest goes to those 3 types of expenses. And the big question is, you know, if 2.5 times my payroll, which is the amount of the loan, is more than the total of all that, what happens to the rest? And there has been no answer to that question. What I've been telling people is just keep the funds. Don't spend it on something you can't spend it on. And then when you get through the process, just pay it back immediately.
All right. Connor says, as a W-2 employee last year, am I eligible for PPP as an independent contractor this year?
And I think I just discussed that a little bit. If you got a 1099 in 2020, if you're an independent contractor in 2020, but you are not in 2019, so in 2019 you're not going to file a Schedule C, then there's no direction yet. That's what I was just saying is for independent contractors and self-employed, the only direction so far is your loan is calculated by looking at line 31 of Schedule C of Form 1040. And what the regulations that say is, if you were not in business in 2019, but you are in 2020, we're going to issue additional guidance on how your loan will be calculated. It hasn't been issued yet.
All right. Todd wants to know, will expanded unemployment, the $600 a week, be retroactive for someone who lost their job during the middle of March? You know?
I know that the state's going to start sending out the $600 this week for those who are already on unemployment. With respect to independent contractors and self-employed, what the Ohio's website says now is that independent contractors and self-employed are eligible for up to 39 weeks of unemployment, and that because they can't process them now and start it now, once they do process and once you're approved, yeah, it will be retroactive.
Larry says, please give your cell phone number again.
It's 513-703-6227.
Mary says, please explain the can't use towards principal on your mortgage. She's a 1099.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
She asked about you not being able to use towards the principal on your mortgage.
Yeah. So when the CARES Act was passed, they just defined certain things that you can use the money for and certain things that, they didn't define what you can't. They just defined what you can use it for. And so they have only allowed mortgage interest. They haven't allowed principal. They haven't exactly said why, but it's just the way the law was written, and the regs have been consistent with that. There have been some things that since the law passed, the regs have changed, but that's not one of them.
All right. Patrick said he's a 1099 and interested in using your firm. Would you prefer calls or text messages to the number you just supplied?
Phone calls, please. Because I'll need to discuss your individual situation. So if you text me, we'll just set a time for a call.
All right. Kim said, so I am a 1099 realtor, and I have had to provide care for my 87-year-old father who needed nursing home care but could not be admitted due to the pandemic. How do I apply for PPP and what else?
So to apply for the PPP, you need to contact your bank, and you need to make sure that if you haven't filed your 1040 Schedule C yet for 2019, that you fill it out, because they're going to be, the first part of the application process is them asking for your average monthly payroll. And that's going to be calculated with line 31 from your Schedule C.
All right, this one is actually for me. John DeVore asked, as these programs evolve, will CABR continue to update us with webinars? We will definitely keep you guys updated as much as we can, whether it be webinars or just maybe information via email or on our website. We'll definitely keep you guys involved as much as we can. So Sherry said, what if your LLC was formed in January 2020? So you don't have a 2019 tax return for your LLC. What can you apply for?
Let me put it this way. Hopefully, if you're an LLC, Well, I guess it's going to be the same either way. If you're an LLC who either you're reporting it as self-employment income or you're being treated as a partnership, then you're going to be in the situation of needing to use your line 31 income from your 2019, which you don't have. And that's the situation where they say, we'll give additional guidance. They just haven't given guidance on that. I would still call your bank though and see if your bank has determined a way to do that with respect to the PPP. And so, and this is why phone calls are good, because it's very much dependent upon what kind of business you have, what your major expenses are, and whether you have employees or it's just self-employment income. The answer to what you should apply for is going to be different depending upon the answer to those questions. So that's why phone calls are great.
Sandy wants to know, do you have a date, or do you happen to know what the date is for unemployment to open to independent contractors?
Well, what the state of Ohio is saying right now is that they hope to have this up and running by May 15th. I would continue checking back though. There is, let me see if I can get back to that page. That shows the page where they're giving the updates. It has been, you scroll down on that page, question 13 talks about when, whether they have it up yet and when they're going to get it up. And so you can check back to that website for updates. And my guess is too, when it opens up, there's going to be news reports on it.
All right. To deduct mortgage interest and utilities, do you have to claim a home office? Jeff says, I work for a commercial real estate company and go into their office. So can I still deduct my home mortgage interest and utilities?
The question will be, did you do that last year on your Schedule C? If you did, then yes. If you didn't, then no.
Okay, so Susan wants to know, when you pay your mortgage, in essence, do you write two checks? One check to pay towards principal and then another paying the interest in order to track it?
I mean, you could do that. And especially if you've opened a separate account in order to track your PPP, then you would want to do that. Just pay the interest out of one account and then pay the principal out of the other. I mean, you're going to have for some reason you decide you have accounting such that you don't need to open a separate account, you will have the bill that shows how much the interest is and how much the principal is. So it's not like it can't be tracked.
And then Sheila wants to know, as an investor, can I apply with a vacant unit? I still have bills on the vacant property coming in.
Can you apply on the vacant unit? I would say, so that, again, with respect to the PPP, whether you want to apply on that depends upon whether you have a Schedule C from last year, and whether you want to apply for payroll depends on whether you have W-2 employees. But if you're just specifically asking as a real estate investor that you're not getting, rent right now, but you need to keep paying bills, then you can apply for the EIDL.
Perfect. All right. Well, that was the last question. So if there's any other things that maybe they missed that you think is important?
I don't think so. I mean, those were a lot of great questions, and I think that we've probably covered everything here. I think everybody has asked all questions.
Perfect.
So, Christy, unless there's something else that you would like for me to cover, I think we're good. And again, give me a call, shoot me an email if you want to talk about getting some additional help. We've been helping clients through the process. I mean, it's certainly something that you can do on your own if you would like to, but I know a lot of people have a lot of questions and want to have someone that they can call and help out with the process. So we're happy to do that.
Perfect. So this was recorded, so it will be on our website. Rebecca, if you want to send over the PowerPoint, I'll put that on separate just so they can access the link.
Absolutely.
And then thank you guys all so much. This was wonderful. I hope you guys are all staying safe out there.
Thanks, Christy.
Thank you, guys.